Streaming live, this is NewsNation Now.
And welcome into the NewsNation Now digital studio. I am Aaron Nolan, joined by Joe Donlin, who anchors our NewsNation on WGN America 7 to 10, Monday through Friday. Joe and I have been watching everything that's happening with the election map. And Joe, you talk about activity today, yesterday, just the opposite of activity. Not much going on right now.
Well, and it felt like today we might actually get an answer to this presidential election. I think at 11 o'clock Central, we were expecting a news conference from Nevada officials. That was pushed back about an hour, and the end result of that is we're going to have to wait considerably longer because they still have tens of thousands of votes to count in Nevada, and it sounds now like they may not actually have a final number until, what did he say, November 12th?
November 12th.
A week from today.
And that is something I tweeted out, and there's a lot of activity. When you start thinking about Election Day, you think about a day. We're into 3 days now. The possibility of a week and a half brings up about a lot of questions. And so that's why we're on Facebook right now. We're on Facebook Live. We would love for you guys out there to ask any questions of Joe or myself. Joe has been covering this. I had a long day on Tuesday on NewsNation, Joe.
We did, 9 hours, and I think there were a lot of questions about whether we might find out on election night. And I think I went into the night thinking we probably wouldn't have an answer, but we would have an idea.
Yeah.
And in the end, we did get that idea because, as we know, the president really had his best path to 270 was to recreate his 2016 path where he wins the Sun Belt, Arizona, Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, and then continues and wins Ohio and Iowa. And if he had done all of that, he still needed either Pennsylvania or Michigan. And he almost got there on election night. He stumbled apparently in Arizona, although that's another thing we should talk about because I'm sure people have questions. Our number right now is at 264. We're using Associated Press. They've called Arizona. Not everyone has called Arizona, which is going to be interesting here when and if the next state falls, because in some scenarios, according to AP, that would put, if Joe Biden wins the next state, whether that's Nevada or Georgia, which could be announced today. That's probably the closest we'll get today to another answer. But if Joe Biden wins the next state, that gets him to 270, unless you're not taking the AP's calling of these races.
For Arizona.
Yeah. And then it would take another state. So
all right,
see how it all unfolds.
The map is behind Joe. Nicole Burley has been manning the touch screen that is behind you. And I want to quickly go through the states that are still at large, if you will. I look at this as a sports guy, like a scoreboard. Right now the score is 264 to 214. Of course, this is a race to 270. Alaska is still out, 50% of the votes in. We do expect Donald Trump to win that. He's leading by 29 points at this time. 3 electoral votes there. Then you get into the final 4, if you will, to keep the sports analogy going. Nevada, we have been talking about a lot today, Joe, because we thought that this might be one of the states where we could see some results, some finality to all of this. And you mentioned that the registrar there in Clark County, which of course is Las Vegas, saying that's unlikely. It looks like next week. Right now, Joe Biden leads by 1 point. Moving over to Pennsylvania, Donald Trump is up by 2 points, 88% of the vote in that state. Going south to North Carolina, 15 electoral votes up for grabs there, 94% reporting Trump leading by 1 point. And then Georgia, you mentioned this, 0.3 points right now for Donald Trump. This is something that is extremely close. And as we look at this state by state, Joe, we're not done even though we're looking at 95, 99% reporting in some of these states.
Well, these last few percent will be key and critical. And we should probably back up just a little bit and talk about a couple of the issues that we've run into in Nevada and also in Pennsylvania. So I know today the Trump campaign did hold a news conference in Nevada and made claims of non-residents voting and saying essentially that they are seeing discrepancies all over. And I think we have a little bit of that news conference queued up that we can listen to and share. This is Rick Grinnell, the former DNI, the Director of National Intelligence. You have that, Aaron?
Yeah.
All right, here we go.
It is unacceptable in this country to have illegal votes counted. And that is what's happening in the state of Nevada. We've asked Clark County for answers. They have no answers. They continue to count illegal votes. That is unacceptable, and it's giving legal people a sense that the system is corrupt.
All right, let's chop that up for a little bit, Aaron, because it really takes us down a couple of different paths.
Okay.
First, to the Clark County Registrar, who responded to some of those claims about, 45 minutes later. That would be Joe Gloria, and he said, I'm not aware of any improper ballots being processed. I don't know whether, at least we can just roll the video of that without the audio or no. Okay. But I don't know if you noticed there was a woman behind him who had glasses and a face mask on, and she stepped up to the microphone at one point there and said that her ballot essentially had been taken from her, I think is how she put it, didn't it? Along with her roommate. And Joe Gloria was asked about that, and Joe Gloria said it was her signature on the ballot. So obviously when these ballots come in, they match the signatures and do whatever else they do to make sure it's valid. And then one of the reporters asked, are you saying she's lying? And he said, I have nothing else to say on that. So that's just for starters.
I mean, you talk about this, and this is something that Joe and I, again, have been doing all morning long, because we came in this morning, Joe in extra early this morning, because we thought that we were going to get a few more votes. And instead of votes, it seems like, Joe, we're getting more lawsuits and we're getting more concerns across the country. What you were just talking about, the Clark County Registrar, Joe Gloria, was responding to some of those accusations from the Trump campaign.
Right. Yeah, and so there was a lawsuit filed, we should point out as well, in Nevada. So that's where we are on that. But that leads us down the path to the president's statement today, which is interesting on a couple of levels in and of itself. The statement, if you count the legal votes, I easily win the election. If you count the illegal and late votes, they can steal the election from us. So that released today from the Trump campaign at about 12:40 Eastern. Now that's interesting for a couple of reasons, because if you haven't seen the president's Twitter feed today, it's quite interesting for a number of reasons. First of all, several of his tweets, in fact, if you scroll through to the last two have been flagged, as we know, by Twitter. And if you read those, the first one says, stop the fraud. And then the next one says, all of the recent Biden-claimed states will be legally challenged by us for voter fraud.
Real quick, I want to stop you for a second, because I'm going to show you exactly what it looks like.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
It may be hard to see, but what you're looking at is some or all of the content shared in this tweet is disputed and might be misleading about an election or other civic process. This is Twitter who is taking these down.
So one of his other tweets that wasn't flagged, because as you'll see here for obvious reasons, all he says is stop the count. Which is interesting, because that's different than what he has said in this statement here, which is if you count the legal votes, I easily win the election. If you count the illegal and late votes, they can steal the election from us. The president clearly would like to stop the vote in Pennsylvania because he's up right now. The problem is with the number of ballots that are outstanding in Philadelphia and in Pittsburgh. Those are leaning heavily, in fact, in some cases 50 to 75% toward Joe Biden, because these were early mail-in ballots. On the other hand, he needs that vote to continue in Arizona, because that gap is shrinking.
Yep.
And he's doing better in Arizona. So another state, as we mentioned, that's been called by the AP, not by others. So a couple of interesting threads just on what's happening in Nevada in particular today. But this thing is by no means over. As we've said earlier, the path for the president is definitely more difficult. I said today on WGN radio, it's almost as if Joe Biden is getting on the Kennedy Expressway in Chicago with the express lanes open, and he's the only one on it.
Yeah.
And the president right now is on the shoulder trying to get into that lane, because his lane is narrow. He needs to win Pennsylvania. If Joe Biden wins Pennsylvania, this thing is over before any of these other states report. Biden wins Arizona and Nevada, it's over without Pennsylvania. That doesn't matter. Biden would be at 270. For the president, he's arguing again that it's not over in Arizona or Nevada. So he needs to win one of those two at least, and then sweep the rest, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina. So that's his path moving forward.
So as we continue to kind of dissect that, looking at it now, again, we're basing everything that we're seeing on the Associated Press. It has called Arizona for Joe Biden. In this moment right now, in order for the president to keep the White House, to win a second term, he's got to win everything else on the board.
Yeah, he does. That's why I say it's a much more difficult path for him. And I think, in Georgia, the president is up 20,000 votes. I think you could certainly make the argument, although that's shrinking as well.
It's down to 13,000 right now. You're looking at 27%, 0.27%.
And I think so what you're seeing as well that's problematic for the president is in Nevada, where as of this morning, the gap was about 8,000 votes in favor of Joe Biden. Now that gap has spread, the last I saw, up to about 11,000 and some change. So that's why I think you're hearing so much from the Trump campaign from Nevada right now.
All right, so it looks like we have a question from someone out there, Joe.
I don't have that.
Okay. All right. So we are on Facebook right now. We would love for you guys to ask questions. Obviously, there's a lot of concern out there as far as when this election will wrap up. The latest indication that we've gotten from Nevada is that this will be into next week, the next vote dump, if you will, where they're going to bring in some of those numbers, bring in some of those votes. Going to be tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, I guess their time, Joe. So that would be 11 o'clock Central, noon out on the East Coast.
Well, we're expecting an update from Georgia election officials at 3 o'clock Eastern today. So that's another thing to keep an eye on, and we will stream that here on NewsNation Now. So keep an eye out for that. The other thing we didn't get into here, Aaron, is the situation in Pennsylvania, because for a time today, the counting was halted temporarily in Philadelphia because of court action there. That has since now been overruled by a higher court, and the counting in Philadelphia is on again. But there's another issue in Allegheny County, which is Pittsburgh, primarily with 29,000 ballots that were sent out and had address issues. As I understand that, this happened in Ohio early on in the early election ballots. They sent essentially the wrong ballots to the right address. So it would be the equivalent of living somewhere thinking you're going to vote for this candidate in this race, and you get different races.
Does that affect the presidential ballot?
I don't know about that, but either way, they needed to be nullified and then reissued. So those 29,000 are in question right now. And in addition to that, there are 6,000 ballots that are being flagged and pulled for manual processing for a number of issues, including creases that made it hard to process it through the scanner, signature issues. So these will be manually counted as well. These are interesting too, because a lot of these things that you hear about, these challenges from the president, involve sort of one-offs, I think you would call it. You know, they need, in some of these states, thousands and thousands of ballots overturned. So they're going to need to go for bigger fish if they're going to try to overturn some of these results. Most recounts, as we're going to see in Wisconsin, result in very few turnovers, maybe 100 or 200 perhaps.
Well, and there was a recount there in Wisconsin 4 years ago. The change there was a couple hundred votes.
Right, minimal.
Lisa has a question, and I think it's a good question, especially considering what you were just talking about, Joe. On Facebook, Lisa asked, where is President Trump's foundation for alleging there are illegal votes?
Well, they didn't answer that in the news conference. And
there was a reporter who kind of forced his way on that.
And they didn't say, other than that non-residents have voted and that they were seeing discrepancies all over. That was in their words. And then again, they did bring two people up to share their stories of how they said they had had issues with their ballots, including the woman we mentioned there a minute ago. Yep. And again, the registrar in Clark County there was adamant. You and I watched that news conference. I think you could also say it was perhaps a little testy. He was quite direct, nerves obviously a bit frayed at this point. And we should probably point out, look, the people who are counting these millions of ballots around the country, very difficult, and they're working around the clock and doing really incredible work. And that's another issue that's at the heart of this thing that you wonder, because the president, one of his claims in Pennsylvania is that they're not being allowed access to watch the counting. And we know on the other side that there are bipartisan observers in these. The president is claiming that he's not being allowed in to observe closer to these vote counts. So this is an issue that I'm sure we've seen now legal action in Pennsylvania and North Carolina. Don't forget North Carolina as well. That's still hanging in the balance. We'll see. Now we see today more legal action in Nevada. So get me back to the question again. What was it again?
Lisa was asking about.
Right, I hope we answered that.
I hope you like my purple sticky notes. Elise is punching the buttons here over here, and she's got purple sticky notes.
Right.
So At least thank you.
Yeah, I hope I answered your question there.
Yeah, all right, so the illegal votes, what's the foundation? What's the basis for that?
We haven't really heard, and that's up to the courts to decide.
And there was something that was said in the press conference earlier with the Trump campaign. They were talking about dead votes, basically people who had already died who have cast a ballot. They talked about voters who have moved outside of the area. They have 30 days. Once you move, you gotta register to vote in the area you now live in. And then they did bring up that illegal votes. Brittany wants to real quickly talk about the numbers again. And Brittany, I think this is a good question. Does President Trump need to win every state that's left to retain the presidency? And Joe, you can correct my math. You can correct my math here. But as I look at it right now, according to the Associated Press, he will have to sweep all 5 states remaining in order to keep the presidency.
Well, as I ran the numbers,
correct me.
He needs either Arizona or Nevada. But at that point, he would need to sweep the rest. That's what I have written down. So
I'm under the assumption right now with the Associated Press that Arizona has already been called for Joe Biden.
Well, there you go. All right,
in that case, how I'm looking at it, and that's where I preface that, Brittany, is because we are trusting the Associated Press. The Associated Press has already called Arizona for Joe Biden. In that scenario, Trump would have to have them all.
Right, and that's why we talked about it a minute ago. See, that we're already there because the next state that gets called, based on the Associated Press's count, would be enough to get Joe Biden to 270. Again, if you're giving Biden Arizona, so that's the key to watch on this, and it'll be interesting to see because the networks, a lot of them have not called Arizona. Fox has, but others have not. So it'll be interesting to see what happens the next go round because Arizona is still very much in play here, despite the fact that AP, and we should also point out that AP is historically steadfast in its belief that it doesn't call a race until it is certain. They don't project, they don't speculate. They wait for a point in time in their numeric formula, whatever that is, that the trailing candidate cannot catch the leading candidate. And when they reach that point, they call it. And AP has taken quite a bit of heat on this, and they've stuck to their guns. So we've come to the dance with AP. We're sticking with them at this point. But once the next state goes down, it'll be enough for Joe Biden, and we'll see where we go from there because certainly the president is not ready to concede Arizona just yet. That's for sure.
I'll correct myself. I think Biden could win Alaska, and that would give Trump 271.
Oh, okay.
So, but Alaska is not a state that's going to go blue. It'll stay.
I'm surprised that hasn't been called yet. But
I agree with that. Joe, I want to go back with you a little bit on your history of elections here. Have you seen anything like this? Obviously in 2000, I think it was 2000, when the Florida recount was happening, that was bizarre.
Right.
But something like this, when we've had 4, 5, 6 states that 48 hours after the polls open, we're still waiting. Have you seen anything like this?
No, but I think it's mainly because of the sheer volume of ballots that we saw.
Which is the biggest election we've ever had in this country.
Absolutely, right. And I think that brings up a couple of interesting points, Aaron. I lived in Portland, Oregon for 20 years, and Oregon has used mail-in balloting exclusively since, I believe, 1999. And I have to say, it's the easiest election system I've ever been a part of. The ballot comes to your house, you fill it out, and you mail it back. Now, what's happened this year is that so many people have done that, and so many states are dealing with this for the first time. There are 5 states that do exclusively vote by mail. These states are up and running. My question on the back end of this, as we watch this and wonder about what's taken so long, and probably should preface this with the fact that in 2000, remember, this was a 5-week process. We are in day 2 after, is that right? So, I think our problem is, what do they call it, the microwave society. We want it right now. We want an answer, and everyone's anxious for it. But the fact is, in 2000, we waited 5 weeks for this thing to settle itself, and the Supreme Court, and the hanging chads. My point being, though, I think what we've learned, if anything, and perhaps states will make changes moving forward as to how these election systems work, but I think to not allow states to at least process ballots ahead of time is a mistake. I think this is why everybody's getting so jammed up in counting. Several of these states, some of them allowed them to start processing, and by processing I mean opening envelopes, opening the secrecy envelope, but not counting just yet. The counting for many of these states didn't start until Election Day. So you have tens of thousands, and in some cases hundreds of thousands of ballots that didn't start counting until Election Day. Look at Florida, though, for example, Florida did allow early counting. They allowed early processing, early counting, and we had results from Florida election night, 2 hours later. Now, having said that, North Carolina and Arizona also allowed for early counting, and look where we are with both of those states.
I want to thank Scott, who has been doing a fantastic job back there of getting us information. Just sent us a tweet from the Georgia Secretary of State. With counting continued in numerous counties throughout Georgia as of 2:15 today, so that is 1:15 Central, there are approximately 47,863 ballots still outstanding. So, Joe, we're at about 48,000 ballots
still out
that are still out. So let's go back, and again, I'm not great with math, but let's look at the numbers.
That's why we're in journalism.
Exactly. That's a great point.
It's a problem. You ask a math question in a newsroom.
So 2.4 million to 2.4 million right now in Georgia. But as you dive deeper, you're looking at 12,000 votes.
Right.
So if we go back to that tweet and look at what is outstanding, 47,000 at 12,000, Joe Biden would need to get, 80% close to.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, Georgia could very well still go to President Trump, and so could North Carolina, for that matter. On that note, you talk about percentages. This is where the numbers do favor Joe Biden in Pennsylvania, because of the remaining and outstanding votes in Pennsylvania, which the last I heard was somewhere. What did we decide? It actually had gone up, right? Scott, what did you say the numbers were in Pennsylvania? They're like 900,000 still outstanding, I think, whereas we thought it was about 750,000. Anyway, 142,000 is the spread for President Trump, which sounds like a lot of votes, but with the votes that are outstanding, those are coming in because they're primarily from Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, urban areas that lean Democratic. Those are coming in 50 to 75% for Joe Biden. So that numeric formula, ultimately Democrats say, will get Joe Biden past President Trump in Pennsylvania. This is what we said earlier. This is why the president would like to stop the count in Pennsylvania right now, because he's up big. The question is, can Joe Biden catch him with the number of mail-in ballots that are still outstanding?
A lot of questions as we continue. Joe and myself will be here ready to jump on at any time that we need to. And then, Joe, tonight, starting at 7 o'clock Central Time on WGN America, you'll be bringing every bit of information that we have, whether or not we're able to call any of these final 5 states. Not sure yet.
Yeah, right now it looks like Georgia's probably our best bet to get an answer today. But even then, with, as you said, 47,000 votes still to count there in Georgia, that may not happen today either.
Yep.
I think we'll probably get an update from Georgia. Whether it brings some clarity, we'll see. But I do think we're going to wait on Nevada, certainly. And I think the president will wait on Nevada and Arizona before this moves forward. And Pennsylvania is going to take at least until tomorrow, maybe even into the weekend.
All right, Joe Donlan, thank you so much. Appreciate you taking the time here on NewsNation Now. I am Aaron Nolan. Again, we're going to continue to update you as we get more information on what is a very busy political week. And of course, make sure you download our app. It is NewsNation Now. It's free, so go do it right now, both on the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store. Have a fantastic afternoon. We'll see you as we need to pop back up. See you.